Hi everyone, Jason here from Spiritualbabies.net, and joining me again this week for Haftarah Halfhour is Rabbi Joshua Neely, and this week we're going through the Haftarah portion for Vayera, and you can find that in 2 Kings 4, 1 through 37, so let's welcome back Rabbi Joshua Neely.
It's good to be back, Jason.
So we're charging through, and we are this week heading towards a different type of Haftarah portion than we maybe used to so far. So do you want to elaborate a little bit on why this one is a step away from where we've been before?
Well, the Haftarot come in two sort of standard varieties, and so far in our discussions we've been looking at Haftarot that are more poetic and more what I think people feel are the prophetic style statements, the words of Isaiah, or then later we'll have Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Amos and others like that, where the prophet is making declarations to the nation of his time about the future, about what is right, what is wrong. It's the exhortation and the condemnation style. What we get today in Vayera and from the book of Kings is the narrative style of the prophetic works. And it's very important that when we read through these Haftarot, we read them with the same mentality as we read the others, which is the Tanakh. The Bible is not recording these stories just so we know that A happened before B, and that Mr. So-and-so traveled to such and such a city. The records of these is not just of journalistic interest. The records are still here to give us an indication of how our lives should be lived, of what role God plays in the world, and how it all fits together. So it's going to give us a slightly different emphasis on a narrative than we're used to. You know, when I read a regular novel, I don't look at the novel the same way as when I read a section of the narrative from Tanakh.
Would it be fair to say that some Haftarah portions are meant to be examples of behavior between people and other people, or between a relationship between us and God, rather than still some of them are still prophetic, but they're showing examples of how God relates to mankind and how man relates to other men?
It's a good way to put it. I'd put one little spin on it, which is that many of the narrative Haftarot show us examples of how not to behave. They're not always recording us at our best. Now, we do get some good examples here of positive behavior and one example of negative, but especially when we get to next week's Haftarah of Vayera, we're going to get a lot more negative, and so it's definitely an example of our behavior. I just wouldn't want to call it all positive or what we should be emulating.
2 Kings 4, 1 through 37 starts. A certain woman, the wife of one of the disciples of the prophets, cried out to Elisha, "Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know how your servant revered the Lord. And now a creditor is coming to seize my 2 children as slaves." Elisha said to her, "What can I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in the house?" She replied, "Your maidservant has nothing at all in the house except a jug of oil." "Go," he said, "and borrow vessels outside from all your neighbors, empty vessels, as many as you can. Then go in and shut the door behind you and your children, and pour oil, in brackets, into those vessels, removing each one as it is filled." I'm assuming here, I mean, oil would have been a really big deal, right? I mean, they used oil to wash themselves. Oil went into their different types of bread, and they cooked with it, and they probably sold it.
Oil was a valuable commodity. It's important to remember we're talking about olive oil here. This isn't petroleum. And one of its primary uses, of course, was for light. This is long before candles became either of good quality or accessible, and certainly long before we had things like kerosene and then electric lights. So oil was a very, very valuable commodity. And so getting a large quantity of oil would mean that it could be easily sold and turned into cash.
Another thing here that's jumping out at me is what kind of, I mean, they're running up to Elisha. Your disciple is dead. Why would Elisha be responsible in this situation?
Well, it's part of the way the culture of the prophets worked in the ancient world. Although we often hear of the solitary prophet, In fact, the prophets often had a following, had people that were part of their school, if you will, their school of thought. And the idea would be here that someone was helping Elisha, was working alongside of him, was following his directions, and has died. Indeed, according to the Midrash, according to rabbinic tradition, this is the wife of Obadiah, who had been the person that had saved hundreds of prophets from being killed by Ahab and Jezebel. So the idea would be, this is someone who has helped the prophets, this is someone who's on the side of God, and he died, and when he died, it left me, his wife, and our children now in this dire strait. And we should point out that this is the first link that we have to the Torah portion. Because right now we've got nothing in here about Abraham, nothing in here about Isaac, nothing in here about any of the things that we get in the Torah portion. What we do see is a person with a child in danger. And that is paralleling the Akedah, paralleling the near sacrifice of Isaac that we get in the Torah portion of what do we do when our child is threatened, when we're not sure if there'll be a future for our child. And what does it mean that there isn't a guaranteed future for the child of a righteous man? Isn't that what we're supposed to expect?
I've got this very Monty Python-esque image now of a band of wandering prophets.
Not too far from the truth, and also prophets who would of people who would serve the prophets, not necessarily be gifted with prophecy themselves, but would follow and serve and help to make sure that the prophet's work could be done. And we're going to see even more of that when we get to the second story, as this Haftarah is made up of two separate stories.
She went away and shut the door behind her and her children. They kept bringing vessels to her, and she kept pouring. The vessels were full, she said to her son, "Bring another vessel." And he answered her, "We have no more vessels." And the oil stopped. She came and told the man of God, and he said, "Go sell the oil and pay your debt, and you and your children shall live on the rest." So it's a big miracle here, right? I mean, we see a lot of kind of big, grandiose miracles in the Torah portions, but this seems a very personal miracle.
It is very personal, and it is very deliberately private, which is something that is a little unusual. I mean, if you think about it, first of all, why bother the oil in the first place? If God's going to make a miracle for them to be sustained, why didn't Elisha just reach into his pouch, pull out 500 gold pieces, hand them to her, and be done? It certainly would have been possible. I mean, it's not as though if God can make oil, God can make gold. It's not a difficult thing there. But the way this is structured gives us a number of lessons, one of which is that she is still dependent upon the goodwill of her neighbors. She has to still work together with them, and she has to participate in this in a way that gets her community involved, because she has to get all the jugs from everyone else. In the end, she's only able to accumulate as much oil as the rest of her community is willing to give her vessels for. And that brings the community back into the idea that they're also responsible for helping people in need. Because we know we can't rely on miracles to happen constantly for people that are in need and deserving. We have to be that miracle. Similarly, according to the Ran, one of the great commentators from the 1400s, 14th century, the 1300s, it was done very deliberately in private. That is to say, they went in, and it says explicitly they shut the door, and they do this oil pouring thing, and then they take the remainder and go out and sell it. And he says, why would God do this? He says, because God wanted to leave it so that it seemed almost a natural event. She goes in, she gathers her resources, and she goes out, and from the outside, outside the black box of the house, you don't know exactly where the oil came from, how it happened. Maybe she had it buried in the cellar. And this provides people an awareness that miracles can happen in ways that are seemingly natural. That if we only think miracles are going to happen in giant, flashy Hollywood style, she's going to stand in the middle of the plaza pouring from a tiny little jar, and it's going to fill up every jar they bring under her, then those will be the only types of miracles that people will give thanks for. And those will be the only kind of miracles that people will acknowledge. But if we begin to notice that miracles can happen in semi-supernatural and purely natural ways, then we become much more attuned to recognizing the miracles when they happen and to having the proper gratitude and acknowledgement of them.
One day Elisha visited Shunem. A wealthy woman lived there. She urged him to have a meal, and whenever he passed by, he would stop for a meal. Once she asked to her husband, "I am sure it is a holy man of God who comes this way regularly. Let us make a small enclosed upper chamber and a place for a bed, a table and a chair, and a lamp stand there for him, so he may stop here whenever he comes to us." One day he came over there. He retired to the upper chamber and laid down. He said to his servant Gehazi, "Call that Shunammite woman." He called her, and she stood before him. He said to him, "Tell her, you have gone to all this trouble for us. What can we do for you? Can we speak on your behalf to the king or to the army commander?" And she replied, "I live among my own people." "What then can be done for her?" he asked. "The fact is," said Gehazi, "she has no son, and her husband is old." "Call her," he said. And he called her, and she stood in the doorway, and Elisha said, "At this season next year you will be embracing a son." She replied, "Please, my lord, man of God, do not delude your maidservant." I can see some really clear parallels here. And Sarah, is there anything you want to expand on that passage?
Well, I mean, you already touched on one of the main things, which is the incredulity of this, and the gift of a child late in life is clearly meant to parallel the story of Abraham and Sarah. And no spoiler alerts, but we're going to see the end also has some clear parallels. But what's also very striking and just such a great reminder of the beautiful literary quality of these stories is the way this section, from verse 8 on, is a sort of mirror image of the section that we read in the first part of chapter 4. So in the first part of chapter 4, you have a woman with children and no money, and she's about to lose her children. And in this story, you have a woman that is declared as being wealthy right up at the beginning, that she is a powerful, important, and wealthy woman, but she's lacking children. And you end up with this sort of mirror image of the two family situations, and both families feel, in a sense, incomplete. Now, her ability to recognize Elisha as a man of God, her willingness to help him is a very powerful gesture of support, and he wants to reciprocate. You know, you've done this for me, what can I do for you? And typical fashion, he says, maybe I can talk to the king for you, or maybe I can, talk to the army commander, get somebody out of the draft that you don't want to go off to the war or something, and let me see if I can put a good word in. She's like, no, I don't need that. And then we get this very interesting statement where Gehazi says, well, they got no kids, and her husband's old, which means it's unlikely that a kid's be coming. So Elisha says, tell you what, you'll have a kid in a year. And her response is something we're going to have to come back to, because don't delude me, don't lie to me could also be a translation of that. Don't deceive me. And it's not just the laughter of Sarah. It has a much sharper tone to it. And as we're going to see, it's going to come back by the end of the story. There is a definite notion that she is not just skeptical of the possibility, but skeptical of the reality, that this would be a good thing. And we're going to find out why, because that's going to come as the story draws to its conclusion.
The woman conceived and bore a son in the same season the following year. Elisha assured her. One day he went out to his father among the reapers. Suddenly he cried to his father, "Oh, my head, my head!" He said to his servant, "Carry him to his mother." He picked him up and brought him to his mother, and the child sat on her lap until noon, and he died. She took him and laid him on the bed of the man of God, and left him and closed the door. And she said to her husband, "Please send me one of the servants and one of the she-asses, so I can hurry to the man of God and back." But he replied, "Why are you going to him today? It's neither new moon or Sabbath." She answered, "It's all right." So it's been this terrible accident, and then he dies. And now What's the relevance with the phrase "it's neither a new moon or a Sabbath"? Is that specifically when they'd go and spend time with the prophet?
Well, as you may have noticed from your own life, a lot of people seem to think, and her husband seems to be one of them, that you schedule time to be with God. You schedule time for religion. And when it's not the right time, then why would you be doing it? You know, if someone were to say to their friend, "Oh, I've got to go stop by the synagogue, on this afternoon," it's like, "What? Is it a holiday?" It's like, "Well, no." I wanted to talk to the rabbi about something, or I wanted to get a book from the library, or whatever. I wanted to volunteer. There are a lot of reasons to visit, in quote, the man of God, other than the fixed holiday seasons. But her husband doesn't get it. And throughout the whole story, her husband doesn't really get it. You know, she's the one who takes charge of proposing to build the room for Elisha. She's the one who is discussed with this gift of the child. Not the husband. He's not involved in that conversation at all. Her husband, when the son gets ill, has a servant take him back to the house. And by the way, many commentators say that it wasn't a harvest accident, but it was just that the kid became was overcome by some illness while he was out in the field. It may have been a heat stroke from being out there or something, but just sort of my head, and down he went. Because the father doesn't, at least to give him the benefit of the doubt, he's not running back with the kid. Presumably, he's not bleeding from some giant gash. He thinks, the kid's just whatever. But still, he doesn't go back with the child. He just sends him off with the servant and then holds him, and then he dies. And so she says, "I'm going to go to the man of God." And that's the real question. Why? So for what? Your sons died, people died, and that's where we're going to get into the next section.
I'm kind of giving the old fella the benefit of the doubt. If he was already old, had the baby, I'm assuming he's going to be ultra old now. I'm surprised he's even in the field. She had the ass saddled and said to her servant, "Urge the beast on. See that I don't slow you down unless I tell you." She went on until she came to the god of Mount Carmel, and the man of God saw her from afar. He said to his servant Gehazi, "There is that Shunammite woman. Go, hurry towards her and ask, 'How are you? How is your husband? How is your child?' 'We are well,' she replied. But when she came up to the man of God on the mountain, she clasped his feet. Gehazi stepped forward to push her away, but the man of God said, 'Let her alone, for she is in bitter distress, and the Lord has hidden it from me, and he has not told me.' And she said, 'Did I ask my Lord for a son? Didn't I say, don't mislead me?'" All right, so I'm guessing that she feels kind of duped.
Duped is putting it mildly. It comes through very strongly that she was expecting if you're going to give me a child, don't give me the child and then take the child away, because the pain of losing a child is worse than the pain of not having one. And so she knew this was a possibility. And when she said, "Don't deceive me," she was essentially trying to ask for a guarantee. One of the things that drives this home is completely lost in the English translation, which is the repetition of the word shalom. Now, you don't see the word peace or the word hello and goodbye anywhere in the translation. But in the Hebrew, when her husband asks her, "Why are you going to go see the man of God?" she responds not, "It's okay." She responds, "Shalom." And then when Elisha is telling Gehazi to run out and greet her, and it says, "Ask her how she is, how is her husband, how is her child," the way that is asked, and it's true in modern Hebrew as well, asking about the shalom. Hashalom lach. Hashalom lishach. Hashalom layeled. It's shalom, shalom, shalom. It's asking about the peace. How is your peace? And again, if you didn't already know, for our listeners, the word shalom in Hebrew means more than just peace, like cessation of violence. It means peace in the sense of wholeness, tranquility, and everything being in the proper place. And that it's shalom that is being sought here. It is being a complete peace, and that's what needs to be restored. That's her mission. She wants her peace restored. And that's not going to happen until Elisha gets to work.
Is there an element here of her worrying about being turned away? I find it odd that approaching someone she's travelled to go and visit, and it's called out, "Are you all okay?" And she says yes, when clearly they're not okay. I mean, was there an element of oh no, like she looks like she's really annoyed, so tell her we're not in, or don't let her come close? It seems very strange to me that when asked, "How is your son?" she'd say, "We're okay."
Well, who is she saying okay to? Gehazi doesn't do well. And she's not willing to talk to him. She's sort of basically saying, yeah. I don't want to talk to my husband because he's not going to help me. I don't want to talk to Gehazi because he's not going to help me. There's only one person I want to talk to, and he's standing over there. According to our tradition, Gehazi, when he is pushing her away, is diplomatically put taking liberties. That he is using this as a chance to insult her in intimate ways. He's touching her in inappropriate ways. And you may think, well, wait a minute, where do we get that from? And it comes from the more we see of Gehazi's character revealed at the end of this Haftarah implied, and in other sections of his stories with Elisha explicitly, where Gehazi comes across as being a very material person, someone who is focused far too much on the material world, which includes money and apparently also includes women, and we're also going to see includes a little bit of his own arrogance and pride.
He said to Gehazi, "Tie up your skirts, take my staff in your hand, and go. If you meet anyone, do not greet him, and if anyone greets you, do not answer him. And place my staff over the face of the boy." But the boy's mother said, "As the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." So he arose and followed her. I'm reminded of Moses girding his loins. I like that idea, of them, like hoisting up their robes and their stick and then legging it across the desert. I think that's a really great image.
And it's a symbol of urgency and of directed energy. And she's not taking it from the servant. She wants Elisha to come, not just Gehazi.
I spent about 15 years maybe in retail, and I've met plenty of people like that. I want to speak to the manager.
Exactly right.
Gehazi had gone on before him and had placed the staff over the boy's face, but there was no sound or response. He turned back to meet him and told him, "The boy has not awakened." Elisha came into the house, and there was the boy laid out dead on his couch. He went in and shut the door between the two of them and prayed to the Lord. Then he mounted the bed and placed himself over the child. He put his mouth on its mouth, his eyes on its eyes, and his hands on its hands, and he bent over it, and the body of the child became warm. He stepped down, walked once up and down the room, then mounted and bent over him. Thereupon the boy sneezed 7 times, and the boy opened his eyes. Elisha called Gehazi and said, "Call the Shunammite woman," and he called her. When she came to him, he said, "Pick up your son." She came and fell at his feet and bowed low to the ground. Then she picked up her son and left. Well, there's a lot in that.
To say the least.
I'm slightly curious. I read somewhere, or maybe I saw somewhere, that generally there was one kind of good cot in a house at that time, and that was generally given to the first son who's going to look after the home. So I find that his couch is an interesting phrase. But what I'm kind of curious about is why Elisha had to do all those things.
Exactly right. So first of all, why did Elisha have to do anything when he had sent Gehazi ahead and to lay the staff on the child? And so this is again where rabbinic tradition, where Midrash comes in and says, well, wait a minute. So if Elisha gave him instructions and those instructions didn't work, we have to believe that the mistake came from Gehazi, not from the instructions. And that means we have to look back at the instructions and figure out what Gehazi didn't do, where the mistake went. Now, we know that he put the staff on the kid's face, but what we don't hear is that he didn't greet anyone. And so rabbinic tradition says that while Gehazi was running, he did indeed say, I'm going to go raise the dead with this stick. He was shouting it arrogantly, or according to other commentators, he was shouting it incredulously. Do you really think this is going to bring a kid back to life? But hey, Elisha told me to go put it on the kid's face, so that's what I'm going to do. And either way you look at it, either of running with arrogance as though he gets to do a miracle, or running with this doubtful, spiteful tone that this isn't going to work, either way, Gehazi was not fit to be an instrument for a miracle to take place. And so it's not surprising that when Elisha gets there, the kid's still dead. But again, seeing this little literary parallels from our previous story, what does Elisha do when he goes in? He goes into the room and he shuts the door, the same way the first family shut the door with the miracle of oil, paralleling that this miracle is going to happen in private. Doesn't take the kid out to the town square, doesn't say, behold the power of God, and, you know, lightning flash and the radiant chorus and lights coming down. No. What's important is helping this one child, this one family at this one time. And that's going to happen in a private way, so that we know that miracles can happen privately, not just publicly. And happens with this semi-physical component, what many people have compared to sort of a proto-CPR, to remind ourselves that there has to be a human element, there has to be a human action for the miracle to take place. They don't just happen out of nothingness.
It's conceivable to me that the heat of his body, and if he did literally breathe into him, would, you know, that we know that works.
Mm-hmm.
I also noticed that in the English, the body's only ever referred to as it. Is that the same in the Hebrew? Is there, or is it because it's no longer a living body that it doesn't have a gender?
That's a translator's preference, because there is no it per se in Hebrew. Even inanimate objects are given male and female pronouns at all times. So a table is not called an it in a literal sense within Hebrew, although it's certainly implied that it's meant to be an it. Everybody knows that it's not a he or a she, but that's just the way the language is constructed. So the translator felt that if you were going to refer to the body in English, that you would refer to it as an it, and therefore that's what they translated it as. But I think he was trying to draw a distinction in the Hebrew that it does say body rather than boy in some places, and that was probably trying to be emphasized by that word choice.
So I think we have to talk about the sneezes. One, why count? Secondly, why is it important?
Well, why is it important? It means the kid's still alive. Why count? 7 is generally speaking the symbol of completion within the biblical nomenclature. I personally have not come up with not seen a great commentary on specifically why sneezing and why 7. But that's a wonderful thing if someone has heard a good teaching on that, or has come across a good teaching that they might want to share in the comments.
Absolutely, yeah, please do that. So if it finishes, she falls at his feet and bows on the ground, and then she picks up her boy and leaves.
Well, she got what she wanted, and you know it's this wonderful testimony. There's a great book called "Arguing with God" as being a Jewish tradition, and this is somewhat representative of that. That she wasn't just going to say, "Oh well." She made a condition. She said, if you're going to promise me this child, you can't be deceiving me about having a child. You know, you can't give it and take it away, because that's not giving me a child. That's only going to introduce grief. So if you're going to be doing this, man of God, you're making a promise to me, because it's willingly being given, not asked for, then make sure you're not lying when you do this. And therefore, at the end, you know, she would certainly give thanks that her child was alive, and definitely, you know, thank God for this miracle. But no more than that was necessary, because that was a prerequisite for what had happened.
Well, there you go, folks. That was this week's Haftarah portion. If you've got questions and comments, please leave them below. If you've got comments about Haftarah portions which are coming, please leave them below. Maybe we can address them in the show. I wanted to thank you, Rabbi, for joining us again.
It's always a pleasure.
And we'll see you again soon. Hang around for the end of the video, and you'll see the Haftarah portion for next week, so you can get a heads up and study it through. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button, and we'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.